Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone who has joined us here on our Monday, October the 19th Track Announcers Notebook. And this is a real big Track Announcers Notebook show because we've got another track announcer with us, Kenny Abbott, who is in Daytona. Richard Chambers and I, who usually get to head down there in October for the Fall Cycle Scene Race of Champions, the ASRA Final, and all of the other amazing events that are held there in October. Because of COVID-19, of course, weren't able to go. There were no fans allowed. Kenny was able to pinch hit, and I'm sure did an outstanding job working with the mouth of the South, David Graham. And we'll get into all of that, recap Daytona, talk about the general state of the nation in terms of motorcycle road racing in the United States, and also maybe look ahead a little bit to 2021. And we'll also talk to Kenny because he spent several years with the Jordan Suzuki team, what those years were like, and what it was like working with multi-time NBA champion Michael Jordan, who's going four wheels next year as he has formed a NASCAR team. Bubba Wallace will be the driver. So more on that a little bit later on, but right off the top, we go to my co-host, Stuart Nodell, with another look at Nodell's notes and looks what happened last weekend and some of the other news in motorcycle racing. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Just some of the news that had happened. We had an eighth different winner this past weekend in Alex Rins on the Works Suzuki squad. And finishing second was Alex Marquez on the Repsol Honda. So he had another great weekend to back up his very first win from the week before. And Ryan Mayer finished third on the podium, and he's now taken over the championship points in the MotoGP series. So there's 4 rounds left, Pat, and it's going to be a tight race to the finish. So I'm looking forward to watching all those races and following that action. But we had World Superbike wrap up their season, and Johnny Ray ended up clinching his 6th World Superbike championship in a row. So that's pretty remarkable. And American Garrett Gerloff, he qualified on the podium and finished second in one of the legs. So he had an awesome week, and I think he finished the year really strong. So hopefully that'll build his confidence for him, and he'll have a great 2021.
Yeah, and Moto America continues to churn them out to go to the international stage. I think last week they announced, of course, Cameron Beaubier was going to be going and running Moto 2 next year. So lots of exciting things happening with some of the top American riders.
Yeah, that's right. There's actually a lot of Moto American news from this past week. Brandon Posh, who's been riding for the Celtic HSBK team, he's switching over to the Hanos Kawasaki for the final round at Laguna Seca next weekend. And JD Beach is making a return to road racing, filling in that seat in that Yamaha seat with the Celtic team. So the Super Sport race will be pretty exciting and fun to watch next weekend. I think there's no championship at stake, but lots of bragging rights.
Yeah, indeed. Richie Scalante wrapping up that championship at Indy. So that class has produced some amazing racing, and one of the guys who has been running, will be talking about him a little bit with Kenny Abbott, Stefano Mesa, who had an amazing weekend at Daytona. But at Daytona as well, we had the final races of the American Flat Track Championship, where it went right down to the wire, Stuart.
It did, and we had a double winner. Brandon Robinson won both legs, both nights. He won both rounds, and but Briar Bauman did end up clinching the championship and took the victory, but it was close.
Yeah, mere 9 points over former champion Jared Mees, and that is a tough little short track there at Daytona. And even when, Stuart, they moved to the TT format for the last 3 years, that, of course, getting washed out with COVID back in March. And I suppose they looked at running the TT again, maybe, but without fans inside Daytona. They elected to go to the short track. I think they were allowed about 980 fans in the grandstand, which is about 20% of capacity. They ran into a little bit of rain, I think, on Saturday night. That carried over into Sunday for the road racing. We'll get to more of that with Kenny Abbott here in a moment. But a tip of the announcer's cap to everybody associated with American Flat Track that they were able to resume that series. It resumed at the Barber half mile, and then of course sorry, I had a little phone call there come in, but we'll put that on hold. And yeah, great job by American Flat Track to get in all the races they did. All of the classes were hotly contested. And the other thing coming out of there was the fact that Royal Enfield, that mark, is back in the stock or in the stock twins class. And I think they got a win on the weekend after right out of the box finished, I think, 7th or 8th earlier. So we're going to be hearing a lot more from Royal Enfield, I'm sure, next year. And maybe Kenny can shed some light on that as well.
Yeah, it was really cool. On Friday night, I saw the press release. I was trying to get in there. They wouldn't let anybody else in. They wouldn't let our credentials go in there. And they said that they were already at capacity, which it didn't look like it, but it's so hard to tell. But yeah, we tried to get in there Friday night. They wouldn't let us. But Bree Poland, who was in the road race paddock forever, she's now part of the Royal Enfield brand with marketing and doing everything. And they created the flat track team. So I've been following her on social media, and I was watching her throughout the night on social media and what they were going through. It was really cool because Royal Enfield, Indian, and Harley Davidson all on the podium on Friday night. It's sort of a throwback to the 20s is what it feels like, with those three iconic brands running in front of a major motorcycle championship. It's really exciting to see what they've done. And if you go to their website, they actually have a great program where they're teaching people how to build motorcycles and build race motorcycles. And it's just a fantastic program. It's a learning program to get people involved in motorcycling and teach them how to custom build stuff, and then mentors them on how to go racing. It's a fantastic opportunity that Bree put together with the Royal Enfield brand.
Well, indeed, one of the great stories to come out of this season of COVID, if you will. Kenny, I want to welcome you to Track Announcer's Notebook. It's been a number of years since you and I were together at Daytona. I know you've sort of resumed your announcing career, doing all of the CCS and ASRA races up in the middle part of the United States at Black Hawk and other tracks that CCS runs. How did that return to the announcer's booth come about?
Yeah, I when it first started happening, it really took a while to get back into a flow, right? It's I always tell people that it's a muscle I haven't used in a long time, and sort of like getting on a bicycle, right? You're like, oh, I haven't used those muscles in a while. I need to practice that. But unfortunately, how it came about was through the passing of our friend Brian Drebber, who was on his way to the airport in Atlanta to fly to Pittsburgh International Raceway for the Moto America round in 2018. And he hit a deer on the interstate and passed. And I got a phone call a couple hours later from Isan Hung, who is part of the Moto America leadership. And he says, hey, any way you can make it out to Pittsburgh to announce this weekend? So I said, well, let me figure that out. Let me, call work and talk to my family and see if I can get out there. I'll let you know as soon as possible. So I cleared my calendar and told him I could make it. And, I went to leave a message on his phone, and I got a call back about an hour later, and he says, well, here's the story. And he told me the story about Brian. And I went from this high of highs that I was going to go to Pittsburgh and work with Drebber to the fact that I was actually replacing him, which, a 180 emotional swing. And so, just a wave of emotions went through me. And Brian was a good friend of mine. We'd known each other for forever. And he was a fantastic announcer for a long time and a great promoter of the sport and the riders in the sport. So I packed up my stuff and drove out to Pittsburgh. It's about 7 hours from Chicago, where I'm at. So got out there and it was weird. I certainly didn't want to show up and just jump on the microphone, but I showed up and walked around the paddock and started doing a little backstory, getting a little history on everybody. And then, we slowly sort of, worked into the weekend, of course, announcing the passing of Brian, and we had somewhat of a celebration for him on the grid. And I don't have it in here, but Brian Drebber was famous for having a fun meter. And if you asked him how he was doing, he'd always tell you that the fun meter is pinned. And so we flew in a couple boxes of these little round fun meters, and everyone put them on their credential. And I have one on my hat that I wear at the CCS races. And of course, the regional guys don't know Brian as well as the national guys did, but that's just sort of my way to channel Brian in those moments. But that really started it. I got out there to Pittsburgh and I realized how much I missed it. And they asked me to come back for the next round in New Jersey for Moto America in 2018. And then they asked me to come down to do the final at Barber Motorsports Park. So that was the 2018 finale. And they didn't set me up with anybody. So it was just like doing a regional race where I was doing both the hosting and the announcing in pit road and the winner's circle all by myself. So I'm running up and down the stairs and trying to keep track of the grid and the sponsors and reading everything. And it's a lot of, as you know, it's a lot of work to do one of those jobs, much less all of those jobs in a weekend that's so important for the national championship. But that's really what started it was I did that, and I just really fell in love with it again. And Moto America asked me to host the Chicago Motorcycle Show, the International Motorcycle Show booth here in Chicago. So I brought my PA equipment and my speakers and everything, and we were promoting the two local races to us, which is Elkhart Lake and Indianapolis. And just so happened the guy Steve, who was announcing here in the Midwest region, decided he was going to retire this year. And some of the other local Midwest riders that were there came up and said, "Oh, Steve's retiring. You should do the announcing for the Midwest region again." And I said, "Well, if Kevin wants me, he'll call me." So they literally called Kevin, was like, "Hey, Kenny Abbott's available. He said he'd do it if you ask him." And two days later, I got a text from Kevin Elliott that says, "Hey, are you interested in doing announcing in the Midwest region?" And I said, "Absolutely." Now, of course, at the time they were going to be 2-day events, right? CCS is our regional road racing series here in the US. And we usually do a Saturday, Sunday show, but with COVID, they canceled half the season and then made the rest of the races a 3-day event. So then I had to take all these days off of work. I had to use my vacation days on Fridays. And then my wife and I already had a 20th anniversary trip scheduled to ride the motorcycle around Lake Michigan. So there's a couple days I already had off. And so as it came to Daytona here this past weekend, I had to take 2 days off that I didn't have. So, I had already expired all of my vacation days. So I just told my boss, I said, "Hey, it's Daytona. I got to go." So,
it's good you've got an accommodating boss. Take us through the weekend at Daytona. No Team Hammer School on the Friday. It was tech inspection and moving into the garages.
Yep.
What was the feeling like, just the whole buzz around the speedway and in town compared to past years?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot going on. Just the rebellion of people not wanting to wear masks. So you have that battle, and some people being overly I don't think you can be overly cautious, but some people being very cautious and wanting to see everybody in masks. Of course, the speedway wants everyone in masks and that sort of thing. And then you have a bunch of people that don't want to wear masks. So you have that battle going on. So there's always sort of that magnetic repulsion, right? But for the most part, it's a national championship. So, the CCS and the ASRA guys, they were there to race, and it didn't feel any different at the speedway. It felt like, these guys are moving in, they're getting ready to go. It's a big deal. They know that there's always a possibility of rain. It's Florida, so there's a 50-50 chance of rain every day, right? We're used to dealing with that at Daytona. And, at the speedway itself, Saturday was a fantastic day of racing. The track record holder, Stefano Mesa, currently has the track record there, a minute 45.911. And he was down into the mid 46s. So he was pretty close, only about a second off his track record time. And Jason Farrell was right there with him. Tony Storniolo, another guy from here in the Midwest, was right there as well. Greg Melka, the milkman with the #1 plate, he was there as well. All those guys running very, very close times, sub minute 50 lap time. So we knew it was going to be a real exciting race weekend. And then Saturday night, just downpour almost all night. We got rain right at the end of the day, about 4:30, 5 o'clock it started, which obviously affected the dirt track as well. But it rained all night. It rained till maybe 4 o'clock in the morning. And so unfortunately, we start with a brand new green track on Sunday morning. And the lap times just never got down to where they were on Saturday. As you mentioned, downtown was very light. Traffic in general on International Speedway Boulevard was very light. Traffic on the highways coming in was pretty light. There were still a number of motorcycles moving around and you could hear them. But again, there's no vendors. There was no midway. There was, really nothing that would, nothing public that would provide a gathering place for people. And so the only facilities that were open were the restaurants that are already there. We talked in the pre-show that they didn't grant any additional permits for anything else. If you have a business in downtown Daytona Beach, you could open. If you had an outside patio, you could open. And so you saw people there. And then, of course, with Daytona Bike Week and Biketoberfest, there are those satellite biker bars and destinations. And those I heard were fairly busy. We didn't get out to any of those, but I heard that they were fairly busy, but certainly lighter than what they normally would be. There were a lot of bands that were canceled and that sort of thing. So significantly lighter than what we would have seen in the past. Of course, in the height of AMA Superbike in the 90s, there'd be 500,000 people downtown, 500,000 bikers, they say, would come to town. To me, it felt like Daytona Beach in August. It just, it felt like normal traffic in Daytona Beach. Didn't feel like Bike Week or Biketoberfest at all, to be honest.
But Kenny, I know you ran an awful lot of races in spite of having to deal with the weather. The final race of the American Sport Bike Racing Association, ASRA, usually happens at Daytona, where they wrap up the championship. That's now going to the December 5th, 6th weekend at Homestead.
Yeah.
Take us through the ASRA Sport Bike and the ASRA Super Stock races, because that's where some of the more familiar names like Stefano Mesa, Jason Farrell were running. And I looked at the results of both of those races. It was a fraction of a second, and maybe you can recap those races for you. And it looked like both of those were concluded with another classic chicane to checkered flag drafting battle on that last lap.
You said it. I mean, that was it. The 4 ASR races that took place on Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, were probably 4 of the best races I've seen all year, to be 100% honest with you. It was so close. And, I was at the Moto America race last weekend as well in Indianapolis for the Superbike and with, you mentioned Celtic Racing earlier, Celtic Racing with, winning on the Ducati for the first time in recent Superbike history. And so I was able to celebrate that with them. But Stefano Mesa broke out the 600 there at Indianapolis. And I hadn't seen him ride a 600 yet this year in national competition, but he broke out Kawasaki 636 out there, and he was contending for the lead, and he just barely missed the podium. He got outdrafted on the front straightaway on the final lap. And so I felt like Daytona was a little bit of redemption for him. We saw him come up here to the Midwest region to Road America, and him and Jason Farrell battled it out up here as well. And, you know, it always comes down to those two guys. They've got the fastest Kawasaki's, outside of the Moto America guys. They've got the fastest Kawasaki's in North America, as far as I'm concerned, and they're about as evenly matched as you could possibly get. But the sport bike, which is the 600 class, and the super stock class, so I'm still a little hoarse from yelling all weekend.
Couple of days.
It's been a long couple of days. But those two classes were identical. You saw some of the best riders in CCS competition, and it came down to Mesa just stalking Jason Farrell for 6 laps. And coming down to the final lap, it looked as though Mesa would use the slingshot coming off the high bank and actually pass him going into the chicane. And you saw him pull right alongside and then just back off, as we've seen at Daytona for the last 80 years, right? And he follows them through the chicane, and then as they go back up onto the high bank, you see him just tuck right in. And it isn't until they get to NASCAR 4 that you see him slingshot past. And they were side by side, separated by only thousandths of a second in both of those races. But it was funny because the 600 race was identical to the Superstock 1000 race. Mesa did the exact same thing, the exact same strategy. And David Graham and I were talking about it the whole time. Is Mesa going to go past? You know, is he going to hold off? Is he going to, outbreak him going into the chicane, or is he going to wait till afterwards? It was both of those races were completely identical. So, if Mesa wrote the script for the weekend, that was it, and he executed it perfectly. But, back behind him, some of the best racing that we've seen all year from ASRA, with some of the regional champions from all over the country. It was really fantastic. And in the Thunderbike class, there's a big mix of bikes there as well. We had a Ducati in there. We had a couple Yamahas and a bunch of SV650s. It's a big host of motorcycles there, and that was a fantastic race as well. A friend of ours, Robert Lackey, out of Oklahoma, him and Chris Lilligard put together a motorcycle for Indianapolis last weekend, and he had a technical issue and wasn't able to qualify. So, they put all these sponsors together and this big program for Indianapolis last weekend, and then didn't get a chance to race. And so they were able to break that bike out here at Daytona Beach, and he actually had some success. So it was good to see at the end of the year that, guys are still putting bikes together just to run Daytona because of what Daytona is, that being the world center of racing and a winner-take-all national championship.
Yeah, and Lilligard ended up winning that Azra Thunderbike race, I think, by a big margin. I think it was about 25 seconds. So
yeah, he ran away.
Yeah. He clearly had an amazing motorcycle.
Yep.
Kenny, over the years, when Richard and I have been there in October, there are always some up-and-coming riders who make their mark, which is sort of a bit of a preview as to how they're going to do the following year. Were there any of the amateur riders that you saw on the weekend? Because we've had the likes of Kevin Schwantz and many others, make their mark there at Daytona in October. What are maybe a couple of the top amateur riders we're going to be hearing a lot more from in 2021?
Oh gosh, you're gonna put me on the spot. Yeah, and I mean, just to go back in history, I was there. I was there with you guys when Colin Edwards won 7 national championships, which launched his career with Yamaha, and he went on to ride a 250 for Dave Harold, and then on to the Vance and Hines Yamaha team, and the rest was history. And honestly, that's why I encourage everybody to go to Daytona Beach, because you never know who's looking, you never know what kind of opportunities you're gonna get. And there was a good handful of guys down there, guys and girls that were down there. We in sending our emails back and forth pre-show, Patricia Fernandez actually had a fantastic ride. She was in several classes on that old GSX-R 1000. She was amazing. She's already an expert and competing in some pro competition, but she, I think she's getting faster, and hanging out with Corey West. I think we'll see more of her coming up. There were a handful of lightweight riders, the Moore family. I'm sure you're familiar with the Moore family, and I think that they've got a couple girls that are racing in some of the lightweight classes and the Moto Girl GT classes, and and they were all super fast. Michaela Moore was outstanding this weekend. There was a kid, number 36. His first name was Corey. I'm going to forget his last name, so I apologize. I should have kept all my grid sheets, but towards the end of the day, they were all wet, so I threw them away. I apologize, but I should have done more research for your show, assuming that you would ask me this question. But so I apologize. But yeah, but there was a couple guys in lightweight classes that are definitely looking to move up and put some white plates on those machines for next year. There were a handful of guys that were fast amateurs that we'll see with white plates next year that the current regional champions are going to have to look out for. These guys were wicked fast, as my Boston friends would say, and they're going to have to deal with some of these guys coming up through. There was a couple riders that started in the second wave with the amateurs, and they moved up to finish top 5, top 10 with some of the experts. So we'll see those guys for sure, and we'll most likely see them in the springtime when we go back for Bike Week.
Yeah, Kenny, in terms of the weekend, what pivots did you have to do in terms of awarding trophies and all of that at the end? Because every one of the riders in amateur and expert who wins a CCS, you're a national champion in that class. And of course, ASRA. Normally we go to Gatorade Victory Lane and interview the top 3 and all those. How much of that were you able to get done?
We did quite a bit of that, honestly. We slowed down a little bit when it was raining. We only did the leader, and they did the trophy presentation they took the photographs in Tech Garage. But then when it stopped raining, riders were able to come back into the winner's circle and do that. That was mostly just to keep the ladies dry, and so they didn't have to stand outside. But the rule was, if you wanted your picture taken in Gatorade Victory Lane, you had to have a mask on. So, I of course had my mask on all weekend anyway. But all the riders either kept their helmet on or they had a mask on. All their crew had to have a mask on. So that was really the only pivot that we had. There was a lot less people in Gatorade Victory Lane this year, but certainly, I would go down there and interview the winner. Sometimes we would interview just the winner. If we had time to interview the top 3, we did that as well. As you know, they stack those CCS classes. Sometimes there's 4 different classes in one race, right? Or 5 different classes in one race. So in that case, I'll interview anybody I can until the next winner comes into the victory lane, and we just I'll just kind of knock them down, and then the Mouth of the South, David Graham was upstairs going through the calls to bring the next group up to the pre-grid, and as I was taking the elevator back to the roof, he was doing the grid for the next race, and I would call the west end and he would call the east end, and I'd go back downstairs again. So I was part of my weekend, just like any other regional weekend, I'm going up and down the stairs, and
get the cardio.
At least in Daytona, they had an elevator. So
yeah, good. I'm going to go to Stuart and Odell for a moment to see if we've got any questions or comments for Kenny Abbott on his weekend at Daytona. And as well, we're going to get into this in the second half. Kenny spent a number of years working with the Jordan Suzuki team in AMA Superbike. We're going to talk lots about that when we come back. But Stuart, what questions or comments do we have?
I think it'd be great to get Kenny's insight onto a fan favorite on this show, Super Carl Soltis, Michigan, and how he did in the ASRA Sport Bike class. That's really the main question. We have a couple people from Michigan, and I'm sure you know them, Kenny, Pete and Carol.
Yeah.
He knows Pete and Carol. So they're certainly in Super Carl's corner.
So am I. I'm a huge fan of Super Carl, and he's of course a regional racer here in the Midwest region. So we saw him at several of the Midwest region CCS races. I've seen him at all of the Moto America races this year as well. The Moto America season with COVID, they canceled several of the events, but the first 2 events were held at Road America right here in beautiful Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. So we had 2 races here in Elkhart, and then we had a CCS race here in Elkhart, and then we had several track days, but then the normal Midwest region races. So I saw Carl Soltis quite a bit this year. He's got a cool rig and he's got a fun story, and he's always making things fun on the racetrack, and it helps that he's wicked fast. But yeah, Carl was able to wrap up. You know, he followed the series enough and got enough points where he was able to wrap up the championship this weekend. So that's all he needed. I think he finished third in the super stock race, right behind Mesa and Farrell, and it was a last lap pass. So in that 600 race, we were talking about the strategies at Daytona. Just as we saw Mesa go past Farrell on the last lap, we saw Soltis go past Melka on the last lap with the exact same draft, and actually happening the exact same location, just about 3 seconds apart from each other. And it was a fantastic race. But you know, part of winning championships is being consistent, and Carl's consistently fast, and he's got a great program, and actually one of his competitors helped him with parts so that he could continue racing this weekend and be able to wrap up that championship. So it really goes to the sportsmanship of the riders in the ASRA and CCS paddock. And, you know, so being that he wrapped up the championship this weekend, as we mentioned earlier, he doesn't have to go to Homestead in December, which is a pretty long drive from Michigan. It takes us about 20 hours just to get to Florida, and then it's another day to get to South Florida. So it's going to save him a lot of budget not having to go down there, but he's still able to, you know, put that trophy on the mantle at the end of the year.
Kenny, one rider you mentioned there, Greg Melka from Tampa, Florida, always carries that bright yellow, canary yellow paint scheme on his bikes. I don't know how many of his races that we've had the pleasure of announcing, but he's one of those guys who always shows up, always at Daytona, both in March and in October. He runs Formula 40, so I know he's over 40 years of age, probably 45 or 46.
Yeah.
But still very, very fast.
Yeah.
Usually runs the Michelin rubber. And what kind of a weekend did the Milkman have other than that fourth in Asra sport bike?
Yep. Yeah. You know, he was outstanding. He was highly competitive. You know, all the same guys were in all the same classes, right? You had Melka and Farrell and Mesa and Soltis and, you know, and all these guys all in the same class. And so it was just the same races over and over and over again. And he was in the mix the entire time. He won a couple races. He took home a couple rocks for himself in the national classes. He was right there competing for the podium. As you mentioned, not bad for an old guy, right? And but I over the weekend I was mentioning he's got the Sunshine bike from the Sunshine State, being from Tampa, Florida. But you know, one of the things that I always look for at places like that, you know, me being a marketing guy, and this might be a transition into the whole Jordan scenario, is that, you know, I always look for something on the motorcycles that stands out, and I call it the Daytona effect. Right, you can see Melka all the way across the speedway because he's got that bright yellow motorcycle. And we did the same thing when we showed up at the Jordan team in 2004. You know, they had painted most of the motorcycle black, and you know, against my recommendation. And so, you know, when our bike was going around the banking, it was just a black Yamaha like all the other black Yamahas. I said, look, man, this thing needs to be this thing needs to be Carolina blue. There's no other Carolina blue bike in the field. We need to be Carolina blue, and you can see it from across the speedway at Daytona. And that way Pat Gonzalez will know exactly where we're at on the racetrack. And that was the convincing that took that allowed Mr. Jordan to say, okay, yeah, you're right. It needs to be Carolina blue. Let's make the change. And by the time we got to California, all the bikes were Carolina blue, and that was the 2004 theme.
Yeah, Kenny, take us back to your start with the Jordan Suzuki team. I think it got launched in 2004, I believe, went all the way up to 2013. So Michael was part of that whole AMA superbike scene with some outstanding riders. And as you said, they used the North Carolina Tar Heels baby blue, powder blue for many of the years, but there were other paint schemes over the years. And you had National Guard as your title sponsor. Take us through how you got involved and what it was like working with Michael Jordan, and I know some of the people they hired, including a great Canadian mechanic, Carl Steyer, who lives here in Toronto. They had some really good people on that team and some outstanding riders.
Yeah, the race team, when we put that together, Pete Mohar and I, really put that together, and I really wanted it to be organic. I wanted the team to be to be a real team of guys that work together. What you find in a lot of these pro paddocks is you have two riders with two different teams that are somewhat at odds with each other. They don't want to share data, and it's two riders against each other, two teams against each other in the same team, and I really didn't want to do that. A lot of times you have a number two mechanic who's fighting to get the number one mechanic's job, and the number one mechanic's fighting to get the crew chief job, and there's a lot of infighting and finger pointing and that sort of thing, so that everybody can work their way up the ladder. And we didn't really want to do that. We started at the top with some of the engineers and engine builders and said, okay, who do we really want as a crew chief, and who does the crew chief want as a number one, and who does the number one want as a number two, and let those teams of guys really sort of invite their friends and mechanics into the fold there, so that they wanted to be together. And so we were able to create a team there of guys that wanted to hang out together. They wanted to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. They wanted to travel together. They wanted to work together to make each other successful. And, from the very beginning, we utilized the team concepts that we see in team sports, successful team sports, decade after decade. And that's, just never underestimating the power of teamwork. And so there are a lot of Jordan themes that we would use to band folks together. But going back to 2004, Pete Mohar, as you know, at Gemini Technology, he was the guy behind the Harley Davidson Superbike programs. So the engineers that designed the Harley Davidson Superbikes that we saw, Chris Carr and Scott Russell and all those, and even Miguel de Hamel, we saw them be very successful. Thomas Wilson on those motorcycles, and you know him well from Canadian Superbike championships with Pascal Picot.
Yeah,
up there. So he had a very solid resume, and so needed to have solid engineering and R&D behind a successful program like that. But as far as riders go, the first rider was one of Michael Jordan's friends, who was a local racer here in the Midwest region. That was Montez Stewart. But going into 2005, Yamaha had decided that they didn't want to support the team in a way that we felt we wanted. We wanted to reduce some of our expenses, and so we were looking for something from some of the manufacturers that would help us reduce some of our expenses. And Yamaha wasn't interested in doing that. They wanted to sell us bikes at retail, and we just didn't think that we wanted to do that. So we pursued other avenues, and we ended up coming to terms with Suzuki. And at the time, Jason Pridmore's 2004 program was breaking down, and he was part of Suzuki with the Star School. And Jason and I had been friends since 1988. So I was trying to help Jason get his program back on track, and quite literally. And so I introduced him to Michael when we were here in Elkhart Lake, and we went down that road. So we knew we were going to take on Jason Pridmore in 2005. And so since he already had a relationship with Suzuki, we were sort of driving the bus in that direction. But I wanted one more guy. And when I was running the Formula USA Championship, I had come across Steve Rapp, and Steve Rapp's manager and I go a long ways back in the Mid-Atlantic region in DC. And so he called me and said, hey, Steve's looking for a place. And I said, oh, I love Steve. I'd love to, if he's looking for a home, I'd love to provide that for him. So 2005, we still had Montez Stewart, but we took on Jason Pridmore and Steve Rapp. And right out of the box in 2005, we led the Superstock race there at Daytona. Jason finished third. The next race at California, Steve Rapp finished third. So we were competitive right out of the box. Now, remember that at that time in 2005, there was 12 factory super stock riders. So for us to even be in that mix was somewhat of a coup. And for us to even be putting together a superbike program, we were told by, I won't throw anybody under the bus, but we were told by one of the manufacturers, by the head of one of the manufacturers here in the US, that we were wasting our time by trying to compete in the superbike class. And towards the end of that conversation, it was brought up that they spend $20 million a year. Well, the conversation was, they were telling us that we were wasting our time in superbike because no one's going to beat Matt and Ben, right? Matt Mladen and Ben Spies. And our point back to them was, well, you spend $20 million a year and you can't beat them either. What's your point? So we continued to pursue superbike with Jason Pridmore. He helped us develop it the first 2 years, 05 and 06. In 2007, we got to hire one of my all-time legend heroes, Aaron Yates, and we brought Aaron Yates on board, and he went fast right away. When we started testing the bike that he inherited from Jason Pridmore, he got on it at the Daytona tire test. As you know, Dunlop tests over the wintertime, so we were invited to that. And he got on the bike, Aaron Yates got on the bike and went around the track a few laps and came back in. He says, and I'll keep the expletives out, but he says that might be one of the fastest motorcycles I ever rode in my life. And we were expecting him to say it was a pile of junk. So, we felt like we were headed in the right direction with him saying that it was fast. And we continued to develop and work it. And that year we finished 4th in the championship. We missed 3rd in the championship that year, right behind Jake Zemke, by I believe it was 3 points, maybe 4 points. And the year after, in 2008, we finished 3rd in the Superbike Championship behind Matt and Ben. And as you know, in this industry, in that class specifically, that hasn't happened in the history of the sport outside of maybe Dale Quarterly on the first number 32 Kawasaki. And so we were very proud of what we did with those programs. We were able to bring on Amar Bazaz and Carl Steyer, and we had some great resources. Just so happens in 2005 was when Amar Bazaz was trying to put together a product to take to the public market with regards to quick shifters and data acquisition systems that were affordable so that club racers could use them. And so he wanted to use us as a testing ground for that. So, who am I to stand in his way? So we allowed him to come on board, and that certainly helped us. But we were able to do all those things. People thought, well, you have Michael Jordan money. Of course you're going to be competitive. But, we did all those things at less than 1/10 what the factories were spending. Not to give anything away, but, factory at the time, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki, Honda, they were spending $15-20 million a year on their programs. We spent less than $2 million. Now, not to say that $2 million isn't a lot of money. It's certainly a lot of money for a privateer effort, but in regards to what it was, half of that's travel, half of that's travel expense, not necessarily cams and pistons. So, it was quite a ride, and I'm really, really proud of a lot of things we did. You can see some of the stuff behind us. We finally made it onto Road Racing World magazine with Aaron Yates. That was something, that everyone sort of covets. Over on this side, we mentioned some of the different color schemes. This was Jason Pridmore on our 2006 motorcycle when it was painted gold to represent the gold medals that Michael had won. So every year was something different. The first year was the beginning, the start, which went back to North Carolina. The second year was the 20th anniversary of the Jordan shoe, as well as the 20th anniversary of Suzuki. So we had 20th anniversary livery. I've got a shoe and some other stuff up here to celebrate that. Year 3 was the gold medals, which is the bike you see behind me here, along with the helmet that I've got to match it. And year 4, we went to the Retro 4. That's actually the blue and white that you see back here behind us. And then year 5 was the 23rd anniversary of number 23. So there was another whole scheme. And that was the year we actually finished first, second in the super stock field with Aaron Yates and Jeff May. We finished third in the Superbike championship. And in my eyes, it doesn't get any better than that. You know, that was also my 20th year in the industry, and just so happens my 20th national championship that I was a part of. I was a part of 19 other national championships with CCS and WIRA, and just so happens the 20th was in the AMA championship, and so yeah, that 20 was kind of a big deal for me personally, and so I get kind of choked up with all that stuff.
Yeah, Kenny, great accomplishment. How did the National Guard sponsorship, because I don't think we'd ever seen that at AMA racing in terms of a major sponsor, and all the promotional work that you did when you went to the races in terms of inviting the local military to come out and catch the AMA championships.
Yeah, that was a big deal. You know, the DoD, the Department of Defense here in the U.S., they were putting an end to all motorsports sponsorship advertising. And so they were under very specific guidelines that things could only go a certain length of time. Well, when we were in that whole program actually started in 2007, the negotiations for that. So in 2007, we were out at the AMA National in Utah and at Miller Motorsports Park. And there was there were some National Guardsmen who did the flyover, and they were a part of all that out there. And they came down and they were going through, you know, looking at all the motorcycles and stuff like that. And just so happened, we were the only team. I was the only person that invited them into the paddock, into the garage, to eat lunch with us, to sit with the racers. I introduced them to Michael, and we were the only team in the entire paddock that invited them in, and they just really liked that. And so the marketing person that was in charge of all of that, his name was Sergeant Metzler. Sergeant Metzler just really took to that, and he continued to follow us, and he went to some other races with us. And he decided that this was something that he wanted to do. And he thought that with the recognition of being with Michael Jordan and being able to perhaps get more, use this platform to recruit more people into the National Guard was a good match, a good fit. So we put together a program for the next 5 years. And a lot of people probably don't know the significance of Jake Zemke and the number 54 when that kicked off in 2009. Did you ever hear that story?
No.
So there are 54 territories in the United States, which are defended by the National Guard. So that's why it was number 54. And they wanted a rider who would attract minority recruits. And so it had to be someone who wasn't white. And just so happened Jake Zemke was looking for a ride, and he was fully capable of riding a superbike to a podium at Daytona. So that was the decision, was we wanted to go with Jake Zemke. He was going to ride a number 54 on the National Guard Suzuki. And so there it was. We put together a whole program behind that. Not only a recruiting program that you guys saw at the racetracks that were activated, but we actually had Jason Pridmore going around to military installations around the country doing advanced riding schools for enlisted personnel. This whole program actually changed the entire Department of Defense code when it came to enlisted personnel on motorcycles. It changed what they were required to wear while they were on base. They had to have safety vests on. They were required to take advanced riding schools, which we provided through Jason Pridmore and through the Motorcycle Safety Foundation, and started getting them out to local track days. So it changed the entire thing. And what they saw over the next 5 years to that activation was they saw the number of injured enlisted personnel on motorcycles drop by almost 50%. So not only was it a cool sponsorship package, but it actually saved lives and was a tremendous value to the American Department of Defense.
Yeah, that's amazing, Kenny. I wasn't aware of that component of that program. I'm going to go to Stuart Nodell. Stuart, have we got any questions, comments for Kenny about his years with the Jordan Suzuki team, or anything in general in terms of the state of road racing in the United States, whether it's
Yeah,
Moto
definitely, Pat.
America, ASRA, CCS? Kenny's got the answers.
I was going to say, Kenny's a man with many hats, and it kind of intrigues me in some of my conversations being a racer with other people still involved in the industry is promoting the sport of racing. It seems like it's lost its way, and it's like we don't, as an industry, know how to do it. And someone like Kenny sure has a lot of insight. But the other question that we had was, I guess part of the Canadian content was Brett McCormick also rode for the Jordan Suzuki team at one time, and
races, yeah.
And I guess the other question we have was the injured rider at Daytona, if Kenny had any kind of follow-up or if he has anything to report on that.
Yeah, caught up in that incident. I don't know if we talked about it at the beginning of the show. I know we talked about it pre-show, but there was a pretty bad incident when CCS was just doing the CCS National Championships towards the end of the day on Sunday. Before it rained, there was a pretty bad accident where Jason Farrell was exiting the infield, and Mesa was pretty lucky. He was actually grid pretty far back, so he wasn't in that lead draft on the first lap. But on the first lap, it was Jason Farrell and Melka and a handful of his fiancee Jessica Capizzi and a handful of other riders that were right behind him. Freight train of 20 motorcycles coming out of the infield up onto the west bank, and Farrell. It was really windy, and so Farrell's, those bikes, they start spinning the rear tire coming out of there. So he starts spinning the tire, and he gets a gust of wind, and it blows him up the banking a little bit. And he kept getting higher and higher and trying to control it. And as it turned out, he actually hit at the bottom of the tough blocks, which are sort of like giant foam hay bales that go up against the top of the wall there, the giant foam barriers. Well, there's a little flap on the bottom to keep riders when they fall, to keep the motorcycles from going underneath them. Well, as it turns out, Jason got so high on the banking that he actually hit that flap and then caught his right side handlebar on the tough block. Now, keep in mind, this is at the top of at least third gear, well over 100 miles an hour. And so Jason caught the tough block. Melka was right behind him. So Jason caught the tough block, and it pitched his motorcycle up and back down towards the banking. Melka had nowhere to go, so he T-boned him. It pulled the tough block off the wall, and then there was because there were several other riders in the draft, it collected a couple other riders, and then one of the riders hit one of the tough blocks as well. So now keep in mind, this is all on the banking. So just like in NASCAR, all this is happening. And so stuff is falling down the banking as the rest of the riders are kind of trying to come through. And it was really scary. Anything that happens at Daytona at speed is scary. This was pretty scary as well. But Jason Farrell went down, Melka went down. There was I think 4 riders down total. Thankfully, all riders are okay. They did transport 2. There was some broken bones, just because of HIPAA and everything else. It's not my business to tell everyone what injuries they have, but there were some broken bones. But by the end of the night, we did hear from everyone, and they were making jokes about what had happened and what their status was. So everyone's in good spirits, and everyone is okay. It may take some time to recover, but Jason Farrell is okay. Greg Melka will probably be in the hospital there for a bit. Let's see, a couple other guys, they're all going to be okay as well. A couple of people were traumatized from it because of what had happened, and it's a scary thing. Pat, you've been through it there as well. It's when things happen there, they happen fast, and even when they don't happen fast, it's still scary. I tell people all the time that that I've crashed at 40 miles an hour and 140 miles an hour, and I've destroyed a helmet both times. So I don't go anywhere without a helmet and the proper safety gear. And thank God you know, we've got companies developing safety gear as fast as they're developing fast engines, and you know, for the most part, you know, the gear that they wear saves their lives and keeps them, you know, racing again. But they, not saying that everyone's okay today, but everyone will be okay. They're all in good spirits at least, and they will be, at least from what we've seen already, they're well on their way to recovery. So we're thankful for that. But it was very, very scary, and thanks for the question. We just, you know, ask everyone to just keep praying for those folks, and get them, so we can get them back and get them healthy and get them to their families, and they can live to race another day.
Kenny, in case anybody's got a question for Kenny, we've got a few more minutes on Track Announcers Notebook. Kenny, just briefly, you did some work with Moto America. You're right in the thick of it with CCS Azure. We've got the WERA Grand National coming up at Barber this weekend.
Yeah.
Where is road racing in the United States right now? You know, given the fact we're still dealing with COVID, but where do you see the sport going for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Yeah, you know, I think COVID, no COVID, I think that, you know, the sport's been struggling globally, at least in North America. You know, I don't know, you know, what the attendance is like in Canada, but, you know, it's been dropping significantly here for a while anyway. I feel like my perspective, I'm allowed to be a little critical. I really put a lot of the lack of promotion and the lack of fans and the lack of media, I put that square on the shoulders of the manufacturers themselves. I think that from a manufacturer level, they've failed to support dealers enough so that dealers can support local racetracks and riders. I think that there's not enough money in the co-promotion budgets. I think that every motorcyclist that leaves a motorcycle dealership should have an AMA membership, a Cycle News, a Road Racing World, and a list of local track days. And the fact that none of those things happen, in my opinion, is a tragedy. When I ran a local Honda shop here in beautiful Aurora, Illinois, I made sure that everyone left here with information on how to get involved in a local club, how to, you know, find the next Motorcycle Safety Foundation course, you know, magazines that were available to them. And we were, you know, giving all that stuff away in a little bag that they could take with them. That's because I believe that's what they deserve. But when we work that up line to the marketing people of the manufacturers, they have no interest, which just baffles me, right? You know, we want more people to ride motorcycles and we want them to continue buying motorcycles, but we're not willing to invest in that journey. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. And one of the things that one of the other examples that I use is that everyone's robbing the same train. You know, everyone pays for advertising in motorcycle magazines that advertise their motorcycles to people who already ride the motorcycles. You know, why are we not spending that same amount of money on outside industry advertising? People that are already within the industry, they've already chosen their tribe, right? You might be on the red tribe or the blue tribe or the green tribe or whatever it is. You've already chosen your tribe, right? Like, you're going to continue buying motorcycles from that manufacturer until you choose a different manufacturer for whatever reason. You know, why are you advertising to me? I'm already an enthusiast. I'm already going to the races. I'm already a part of the economy of the industry. Spend that advertising money on people outside the industry that are looking for alternative forms of transportation. They're looking for ways to save money on their 1.5 hour commute every day. You know, spend the money somewhere else that makes an impression to someone other than enthusiasts who are already buying the product. And that just seems to just fall on deaf ears. When I'm able to get a marketing person in front of me and talk about that, it just seems to go right over their head. They just don't understand the concept. And they say that they don't have the money or the budget or the effort, or they don't know how to do it. And, you know, which I think is ridiculous. You know, one of the things we did with the Jordan team, and I know we're running close on time. One of the things we did with the Jordan team was when you went to a race with the Jordan team, there was a local television station there There was local radio there, and they weren't invited by the AMA. They weren't invited by the manufacturers, and they weren't invited by the racetrack. They were invited by me for the, the promotional, the promotion manager for the Michael Jordan Motorsports race team. They were there, and usually the racetrack wouldn't even give me the credentials to get them in. I had to pay for extra crew credentials to get them in. That's the fundamental problem, is that nobody's trying to bring media into the sport at all. And when we make suggestions like, hey, I can get KTLA and someone to do a live television show from the garage at California Speedway, no one even wants to give us tickets to make that happen. There's just a fundamental breakdown in what promotion is. And I just don't understand it. But until we get past that, the sport's going to continue to struggle, at least here in the United States, when, where it's not a legitimate form of transportation from the age of 16 and up like it is in Europe.
Yeah. Kenny, we appreciate you coming on and your insights on racing, and we hopefully can catch up with you at Daytona come March. And, we'll continue to deal with COVID-19, I'm sure, in the coming months. We do know, we'll go to Stuart here for a minute. SOAR has already put out their schedule for next year. It's available on their website. I'm sure all of the other race organizations are working on their 2021 schedules. And we wish you all the best, Kenny, and thanks again for coming on board. Stuart?
So humbling to be a part of your program, Pat. You're a legend in the Hall of Fame.
Stuart?
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. Thanks, Pat. Just to remind everyone, go to the YouTube channel, click that subscribe button. You'll be notified because we do record all of the shows, and they'll be up on the YouTube channel ASAP. And again, can't thank Kenny enough for coming on. He had great insight, and it's always a pleasure to have you with us, Kenny. And I know you've done a lot of great things in the sport, and you'll continue to do so. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Okay, so on next week's show, we'll have Trevor Daly, who ran a week ago at Indianapolis, a best 16th, but he had a couple of DNFs. He's on his way to Laguna Seca, not to race this weekend, but the final round of the Moto America Championship. We'll recap that next Monday night, talking with Trevor, and we'll also have Dan Kruger and Henry DeGao on, talking a little Macau Grand Prix, as we're just, I think, a couple of weeks away from that event. We'll get an update on what's going to happen at the Macau Grand Prix. So again, my thanks to my co-host, Stuart Nodell, and our special guest tonight, Kenny Abbott. And have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Monday night for the next edition of Track Announcers Notebook. Have a great week, and good evening.